fellow military spouses. What is in your transition ruck? Are you packing around huge amounts of emotional stress and anxiety as your family is preparing to make the biggest transition yet, the one that takes you from active duty service to civilian life? Today, my guest, Richelle Futch, is a military family counselor and coach supporting military families through the most stressful and emotional moments in their lives. I'm so glad you're able to join us today as Rochelle talks about integration into the civilian world and how to prepare yourself in advance. Also, about what kind of tools you need to reduce the stress and emotional burden that will come with transition and retirement. Thank you so much for joining me today on another SpouseLink live stream. I'm Anna Larson. I am a SpouseLink ambassador. I'm also a copywriter, digital marketer, homeschool mom, and a retired military spouse as about 10 months ago. Or I'm sorry, more than that. I think I'm about 16 months now at this point. These live streams that we do are for military spouses that are looking for connection and support as they near or cross over into transition and retirement from the active duty military world. SpouseLink was created in 2012 by AFMA, the American Armed Forces Mutual Aid Association, to support, inform, and inspire military spouses around the world. So as we dive into today's topic, please be sure to leave comments, share experiences, and let us know where you're joining us from, because not only do I value what you have to say, but we encourage you to interact with our guests and our community, because what you have to say is really, truly that important. So if you want to tell me who's online right now, who's listening, I would love to hear from you. Okay, so to get started today, I do want to pull up, let me add this. I'm going to show you Rochelle's bio because, that's what we're here for, is to hear from her. So Rochelle is a Marine Corps veteran and a military spouse. As a mental health counselor, she has 18 years of clinical experience working with government agencies as well as in private practice. She is the founder of Her Ruck, which has provided speaking and training opportunities to serve military and first responder families worldwide. She is also the co-founder and COO of Sponsor Match, a digital marketplace that helps educate and connect sponsor seekers with sponsor providers. We're going to let her tell us a little bit more about herself when we get her up here. So I'm just going to pull this slide down and bring on Rochelle. Hi.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for the invite.
I'm so glad to have you here with me today. I am really excited about today's conversation. Before, when we were in the green room kind of chatting, I was just explaining to Rochelle that this morning has been like full of mistakes all over the place for me, just like things going wrong. So this is like one of those fill your bucket timeframes for me where I'm really excited to kind of just find out what's in my ruck right now, because it's feeling a little light and a little bit empty.
Well, it's really funny because a lot of times people will say, if they're not in the military community, they don't know what a ruck is. And so basically it's just what's in your emotional backpack. What are those things that we wake up and we put on every day for those short-term vulnerabilities and those long-term vulnerabilities that we're carrying with us? And it's surprising because some people sleep with their ruck on, and you notice that because they have interrupted sleep and they have, they can't fall asleep. And so just that weight that we're carrying, that's kind of the gist of it.
And that's such an interesting thought, right? You sleep with your ruck on and you carry that weight constantly. It's got to be exhausting, right?
It's exhausting, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because there's some things that just you can't help, right? You can't help if you were abused as a child. You can't help if your parents separated and things, impacted you or your belief system because you were raised a certain way.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of work to really either make that weight smaller or to remove the weight, even if you just remove it for the day.
Yes, that's so true. Well, when you and I first started chatting, it was because someone had tagged me on a post that you had done on LinkedIn, and that post had gone viral. And I read through it and I was like, this lady is super smart. And what she has to say is so in line with kind of the effort that SpouseLink is trying to do for retiring and transitioning military spouses. And so we started talking. When I reached out to you, we initially talked about like kind of that premise that the military community is a cultural identity.
Mhm.
And that's something that we carry, right? As both
Right.
military spouses, at your service member carries it, your military children carry it, and there's all sorts of things that kind of tie into that. And so when that
Mhm.
transition happens from active duty to the civilian life, we're
Mhm.
forced out of that cultural identity. Like,
Right.
we don't get to have it anymore. It's no longer, it's still part of us in some sense, but
Mhm.
it's not the main hat we're wearing any longer. And
Right.
that can be really jarring, and it can be very uncomfortable and sometimes even devastating to
Mhm.
military families, where it is a much harder transition than people think about. So I'd love to jump into our conversation with my first question, which is really, how does the military culture affect our transition to civilian life?
Yes, great question. So we first transitioned into the military culture first, right? And so it's very kind of similar when you think about um, accepting this new world. And you see a lot of families that the service member sort of gets thrown into it. They have to accept it because they're inundated with it. But you know the military spouses that don't identify. They're like, I don't want military spouse friends. I don't want any of these things.
Yeah,
I this is who I am, and they just kind of deny that culture altogether. And they tend to struggle a little bit. They struggle with relationships. They struggle with building that community. And then once they embrace it, they're like, why didn't I do this sooner? And so it's kind of similar when you're coming out, like you said, how much of this identity do I still get to carry, even though I've spent maybe years in this culture? And I think identifying that the military is a culture is important because a lot of times they don't. And
yeah.
so, really understanding that what makes up a culture, um, and things like how we dress, they all dress the same. Um, I think, yes, I think you have a slide on the
I
culture
I
itself too.
Yeah, I
Um,
do. I'm just going to jump in really quick. So, this
mhm.
is one of the things that Rochelle and I had talked about when we very first met, and I found it absolutely fascinating. So, I would love for you to share just with everyone who's watching now, like, what is Barry's acculturation model, and what does it have to do with what we're even talking about today at this point?
So Barry's acculturation model was really formulated around people from other countries who were integrating into different countries. Yet it really makes sense for the military because we do assimilate to this new culture. And so when you think about what it means to really fully embrace another culture, so assimilation, just for quick definition, assimilation is when you fully embrace the new culture in which you're integrating it or you're coming into. Separation is when you're thrown into a culture like the military, and yet you're kind of denying that being a part of that culture. So those are the military spouses that say, I don't identify as a military spouse. I'm completely separate from that. And so there's that separation. Integration is when you still maintain some of the culture that you bring and you accept some of the culture that you are. And so that's where you're kind of really integrating in. I'm still here and I'm accepting this. And then that marginalization is when you don't fit in either. You don't feel like you belong in the new culture and you don't feel like you belong in the culture in which you left. So civilian, military is the cultures that we're kind of speaking about. So
And do
that's
you
kind of the acculturation model.
So do you think that people can move between these? Because sometimes you feel like you fit in, or maybe you find your tribe, and then you PCS, right? And now
Mhm.
all of a sudden it's marginalization. Maybe you're no
Right.
longer fitting into where you were, but you don't really feel like you're part of where you're. So can you move between these categorizations that they have here?
Yes, and I think the awareness in what you're experiencing and labeling it helps you move, right? Because if you say, "Wow, I'm not connected here, and I was so connected there, and now I feel like I don't belong anywhere." Oh, that's kind of how you described marginalization. So, what do I need to do, right? And so just bringing that awareness or being mindful of that experience is going to help you succeed so much. Especially when you have friends because maybe you fully assimilated into the military culture and then you go back home and you find that I don't really identify with my friends anymore and I don't really have anything to talk about anymore. That's kind of a problem if those relationships were important to you. And so how do you pull and say, "Wait a second, how do I remember where I came from and the things that I enjoyed about this and accept this new culture at the same time. And so integration is the most successful place that you're gonna find.
Yeah. So, okay. So, if we're talking specifically about retirement and transition, just
Mhm.
in your experience, like, are there stages of, I guess, stages that a military spouse or a military family, I would even say, would go through based on this acculturation model? Like, it might start out where they feel marginalized, but then they're able, and then maybe there's this separation where they are kind of just saying, fine, I'm just going to do my own thing and be my own person, and then maybe they really try and like integrate into that, then they find their tribe, or they find their place or their community in their new transitioned location.
Mhm.
And like, is that kind of like what you would see kind of the process happening for a military spouse?
Well, I think, when you talk about even the process of grief, right? They have the stages. And one of the things they always say is that it's not linear. You're not walking from one to the next. You can jump around to any of them. And I think
Mm,
this is very similar. You can, like you said earlier, find yourself feeling really integrated and successful. And then a big change comes, and then you fall back or you fall somewhere else. And so it's not, I want people to know that it's not linear. You're not going to go from one to the next to the next. You may miss a step, but being really mindful of where am I at? What am I experiencing? And how does that fit? Because, Anna, so many spouses have gone before them, right? There's been so
yeah.
many. And they always say, this you can't plan too soon. You can't plan too soon. And so that's the big takeaway is that, when one of the most invalidating things we hear as a military spouse is you knew what you signed up for, right? And like
Right.
I didn't get a crystal ball, so I don't know what I said. I don't know. And so the same thing with transitioning out of the military is you can hear the stories, you can take the advice, and you just have to go through it and experience it to really have that expertise for yourself, because we can't always learn from other people exactly what it feels like and how it's going to be for us. And so making sure that our experience is pulling that wisdom from others, and at the same time that we're fully aware of our experience.
That is so true. So the first good military friend that I had that retired out of the military, like,
Mhm.
I tried to be empathetic, but I really had no clue what they were going through, right? I really didn't understand fully the emotions they were describing, why they would get upset about weird, stupid little things where I'm like, it's not that big of a deal. Of course, you're still part of our community. Of course, we
Mhm.
still accept you with everything. But the reality is that you lose certain benefits, you lose access to certain community things that you're used to having access to. You have a different ID card now. You are lower on the list of priorities in every single military based,
Mhm.
office that there could possibly be. And the feelings that come with losing that identity or that place
Mhm.
within the community you're involved in really are so individualized. I mean, I
Mhm.
like I like to tell the story about my last day when my husband went to go get his DD 214, and I just had a complete breakdown, right? And I
Mhm.
did not expect that to happen. I thought I was totally prepared. I thought I was ready, but man, it was an immediate feeling of that marginalization, like I don't have a
Mhm.
place anymore. And that's what I felt that day was like, I don't belong to the military spouse world anymore. And I'm also not really truly a civilian because I don't even know what that means. It's been so long since I've
Mhm.
lived that life. I don't know how to do that at the age and the stage of life I'm in right now. It
Mhm.
was really difficult. So I
Mhm.
love that you're bringing this up and just saying, hey, we got to talk about this, like, and recognize, yeah, Charlene, I'm glad I'm not the only one, right? But just talk about and just recognize what these stages are, and that you can flip-flop back and forth between all of them.
Mhm. And not all transitioning families are retiring, right? Some of
Yeah.
them are leaving at 10 years or 4 years or 6 years. And what does that look like for them? Because they don't even get that next ID card sometimes. So depending
Yes.
on what that looks like, um, they can absolutely feel like, well, I don't know that I was in long enough because I'm not this. And they shove that into different categories of, well, we're not retired, so maybe I don't count. And
Right.
and I just wanna say it does count. Every minute, every second, anything that you've experienced counts. And so
Yeah.
please still identify as a military spouse, even if you're retired, even if you're divorced. Our poor, divorced spouses, that imagine what that feels like for them when they've spent 18 to 22 years in the military, then they get divorced and they really feel shunned or outside the community. I don't want them to
Yeah.
experience that. That experience was real and valid and part of them.
Yeah, a huge part of their life. Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
Okay, so we're going to backpedal just a tiny bit. I'm going to flip slides because I want to talk a little bit about that whole idea of culture in the military.
Mm.
And Rochelle had sent me, just so everyone knows, Rochelle had sent me some slides for a presentation that she had done previously, and it talked about what the military culture really is. Thank you, Jen. I do too. It's so important. Yay. Anyway, so I just pulled some of the information she had off her slides, and I'm going to let her just talk a little bit about military culture for military spouses and these things that are on here and kind of what this all means.
I really hope that there's some civilians listening today, especially around, those who employ military families, so they can really understand that. And that LinkedIn post that we talked about earlier that went viral was around whether military spouses should identify as a military spouse on their profiles and on their cover letters or their resumes and things like that. And I say yes because it's not, I'm the former CEO of this company, right? This is a culture. It's different. It's not a job that you held. You lived in a culture. And we know that because what makes up a culture? So we have our codes of manner. Think about our military code of military justice, our code of military justice. It's literally telling you how to behave and how to act and what our rules and regulations are.
And
So we have that.
I want to jump in here and say, just because military spouses are not signed on to the military, we are still expected to live and behave a certain way
Mhm.
because we are tied to a service member, right? So
Right.
even though military law and military justice doesn't fully apply to us, technically, there is a code of manner that we are expected to live. Yeah.
Absolutely. Think about being on base when the colors rise or set, right? You stop. I was in the Marine Corps and it was you do not walk on our Marine Corps grass, and the spouses and the children do not walk on the grass. And so there's things that you just know, and you follow those manners. Um and
Yeah.
so, and dressing, right? And so the military, the uniforms, you can't go on base without the sea of uniforms tells everybody they're very similar. And we know that when we go to balls or organizational functions and things like that. And so you're inundated with it. And
Yeah.
that's kind of a little bit where that separation comes from for military spouses instead of full integration, is because we aren't putting on those uniforms, and yet we're surrounded by them and we're shopping with them, and they're so much a part of us. And
Yeah.
so and then the language, right? Like acronyms everywhere. Everywhere there's acronyms, and there's so many, and the branches have their own, that sometimes even when you're like a veteran like myself, I'll have to say, wait a minute, what is that? Because we called it something different, or it's been so long since I've been, I don't even remember what that is. But we forget. We say PCS, like they understand that
Yes.
that means we moved and that we've uprooted our entire families and things like that
And within our culture, they do understand. But
within our culture.
outside of our culture, right? They're like, what
Yeah.
is that
What does
exactly?
that
What's a
mean?
PCS? Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And then we have rituals. I have in my slides I have like our retirement rituals and our color rituals and promotional ceremonies. When our spouses retire, oftentimes in those retirement ceremonies, service members are getting certificates, and sometimes a really good units will give the spouse a certificate, and how validating that is for the spouse to be recognized for all of the sacrifices and the service that they've given. Because realistically, we know that the military functions because of our volunteer military spouse force.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of things happen, is because spouses step up and volunteer. And it's so important for that. And then our beliefs, right? And you think about, what does that mean for each branch? We have honor, courage, commitment, and just those things that we believe because we're part of this. And I know I feel safe, like when I'm at the commissary versus when I'm at the grocery store in town, I feel safer. I feel this element of, um, I know we're in better company and that we're a little more secure. And
Yeah.
that's just something that it takes off that, when we moved to Fort Bragg, and I'm from Washington State. So I live close to Tacoma and we have our own crime in Tacoma. But when I moved to Fayetteville and I'm joining the groups, then I start seeing it in all my social media, all these like crimes and all these things happening. And for some reason, the entire time I was there, I lived with this fear because I didn't know what I didn't know. And I just thought, wow, anywhere I go, I could be in the wrong place, or I could be caught up in all these things that are happening. But if I looked in Tacoma, I would see very similar things. But for some reason, it's like, those are my people and I know this crime. I know where to go and where not to go there because I grew up here. And so I didn't realize just how much weight I was carrying and not feeling safe and unsure until we
Yeah.
moved back.
Yeah.
And that's one of those unspoken things that we're experiencing. Imagine transitioning out of the military and moving to a new community for a job or moving back home. That's such a huge unknown sometimes when you're like, my husband has just shy of 2 years left. And so there's a lot of unknown that could happen. He could just surprise and say, "Oh, by the way, I've extended," or "By the way, I'm doing this," and I wouldn't know until I know. And
Yes.
that would be such a curveball.
Yes. It really, so my recent experience that totally ties into what you're talking about right now has to do with healthcare. Okay,
Mhm.
I have been part of the military healthcare system for a long, long time. And since retirement, I am trying to figure out how civilian healthcare works because it is completely different. Okay. And okay, I know this might sound silly to some people, right? They're like, oh, yeah, it's so easy, and or whatever, if they use TRICARE standard, whatever. But I didn't, right? We were always prime. I always had a PCM. I always went to a military facility in that sense, and use those military services. And now navigating through that non-military healthcare system has been really confusing. And I finally just said to my doctor the other day, I said, listen, I don't understand it. I don't know. Like, this is how I did it there. Do I do it the same way with you? And she's like,
Mhm.
no, no, that's not how that works. I'm like, this is my problem. Like, so I feel like I have to explain where I
Mhm.
came from in order to make sure I don't look ridiculous to them, and
Mhm.
it's hard, right? In that sense, but it's just like that right there is like that one thing that's been happening in my life recently where I'm like trying to navigate the civilian medical world and how
Mhm.
different it is from the military side of it.
Yeah.
And there is that fear of looking stupid, getting it
Mhm.
wrong, doing it wrong, and then having to pay for it financially for some reason, right?
Right. And we want to be competent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So, how do
Um,
we prepare for this? I mean, I've got this little ticker going like, how do we prepare for this life, right?
well, I work with two other colleagues, and we have this really great therapeutic model for caregivers that we've created. It's called Green Zone, and one of the skills that we teach was kind of formulated from dialectical behavior therapy (DBT) skill called cope ahead. But we took that and we said, wow, if you're always coping ahead, you're kind of already starting with this premise that something really bad is going to happen. So we call it hope ahead, and we changed it up a little bit. And so I want to introduce a skill of just hope ahead as one method for really getting engaged and thinking about the transitioning that you're about to happen. And so hope is one of those acronyms. So H stands for being honest. So just having that honest conversation around what are the risks and challenges that we're about to face. And that's really difficult to have if you're not on the same page. If one is thinking this is going to be great, I've been dying for this, I've been waiting for this moment to happen, and it's going to be smooth sailing. They're probably in for a big surprise because it's never smooth sailing. There could be
Never.
there could be smoother waters at times, but so just having that conversation, like what are the risks we're about to face, and list those out. And then the O stands for optimistic. That's kind of what brought hope from cope is remaining optimistic because we can get really frozen and stop action and avoid if we
Mhm.
don't think I can be successful in this. We can have a successful transition. And so remaining optimistic through that process as well. And
Yes.
the P, I know some people are like, is that a word? Is that not a word? But we use planful. It's a word now. So plan ahead, create that plan. So go to the transitions classes that they're having. Spouses are most often welcomed. Make sure that you go and learn, create that plan, grow your skills, and seek support. Listening to things like this today, right? This is part of that growing and that planful action that you can take because you're learning from other spouses. Anna's just said she's been through this and she shared her struggles. And so, what a great resource. I am sure that you're really an easy LinkedIn message away if somebody was really struggling, you know?
Absolutely. Yes.
Um,
Please reach out to me. I've been there, done that. I promise. All the emotions all the time.
and that's what we want to see. We want to see people that are modeling like what it means to go through that. So we have be honest, optimistic, planful, and then the E is really for encouraging. So how are we encouraging one another and our family members? Because we have our kiddos going through it, we have our spouse going through it. How are we encouraging ourselves? Because I promise you that you can do this. You will get through this, and it really kind of is on you to get through it.
Yeah.
Because while there are some resources out there, the lion's share of the work of being successful falls on you.
Yeah. It really does. And I mean, and that was one of the reasons we started these live streams is because I know that there are resources out there, but there was no easy way to find them. There was
Mhm.
no like, hey, everybody knows you go here if you're struggling with this. Hey, I mean,
Mhm.
and on top of it, and I love to remind the listeners for these live streams with this, on top of this, we are always, not always, I'm not gonna use that finality kind of word, but we military spouses are very frequently focused on what our service member needs to succeed. And we
Mhm.
forget that there is a second person that also needs things to make it through these kinds of transitions and, the stressors and whatnot that happen. And we focus so much on what the service member is doing through the transition process that you get
Mhm.
lost. And so I love what you're saying here, Rochelle, that there are these coping behaviors, there are these things, and reaching out and connecting with people that have gone through it. Me on LinkedIn, Rochelle
Mhm.
for her expertise, her workshops that she has, like all these things that are available to us. Take advantage of them because they really truly do help. They really,
Mhm.
if nothing else, that somebody else has felt the exact same way that you're feeling right now, devastated because you have a meltdown on the DD-214 day, right? I mean, I'm
Right.
just going to raise my hand and be like, yep, been there and done that. I hope you don't go
Right.
through it, but you might, right? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, it feels alone and you're not alone. It's both. And that's kind of that dialectical spirit that comes in with like dialectical behavior therapy that I specialize in is these two opposing truths that both coexist. How do we
Yeah.
make space for both? I'm alone and I'm not alone. They
Yeah.
seem like they're in conflict, but they're not. And that's really what you just spoke to is kind of where her ruck came from. Because we know that the majority of military spouses are females, and I know we have male military spouses, and I love them all.
Yeah.
But I'm not a male military spouse. And so her ruck really was founded on my experience as a military spouse saying, us too. What about the military spouses? And her ruck was a lot more punchy than our ruck, your ruck, all those things. And when you have a business, you think of marketing. So
The big general we
the
rough,
big
right?
general we ruck, right? And so thinking of her ruck was really to say spouses too and spouses. And so I always want male military spouses to know that I know that her ruck they don't maybe identify with that, and that I know that their experience is a little bit different than mine and the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that leads us perfectly into kind of just like popping in and saying, Rochelle, first
Mhm.
of all, thank you so much for this conversation. I think it's so beneficial just to have the language and the terminology and the understanding of kind of what this transition process is going to look like emotionally, right?
Mhm.
So as I mean, you talked about in the very beginning, like we carry this ruck around with us. And sometimes
Mhm.
we're sleeping with it. And we're going to the grocery store with it. And we're yelling at our kids and it is looming on our backs, right? Or we're doing angry walking at 7 o'clock in the morning because we got to get out some stress and we're still carrying that ruck, right? And when you're transitioning, there's a whole new set of emotions and things that go into that. And so anyway, I want people to know that I just want to say thank you for bringing this conversation forward for transitioning military spouses, because it is something that when you recognize, just acknowledging that it's there makes it easier. It just does, So, okay. Can you tell people if they want to reach out to you, if they want to find out more about your workshops and what you do, how can they find you?
So I'm most active on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I would love that. Please send me a connection request and a message. That's the best place to reach me. If you're interested in workshops or just kind of more what I do, you can go to my website, RochelleFutch.com. And then on Instagram, my Her Ruck is at Her Ruck. And so sometimes when I do workshops or post things, I'll post it on there.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone that joined us today for this SpouseLink live stream. I'm going to pull this down so we can see our faces as we're saying goodbye. Rochelle, thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us and for the comments. Clearly, even just from the comments, you can see that a lot of people that are going through this process are identifying with the conversation that we had today. As always, SpouseLink is here to help inform and inspire and support military spouses around the world. They focus on active duty. This work is for retired and transitioning, but they have a fantastic resource full of blogs if you're interested in just kind of hearing other people's experiences. Most of them are like a life experience type blogs, which I love to read. Stories about other military spouses because I can identify with them. So anyway, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today on the SpouseLink live stream. Make sure you visit spouselink.afma.com and get connected. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, reach out to Rochelle on LinkedIn, and we will see you actually on Monday is our next SpouseLink live stream. And we're going to be talking about entrepreneurship and how entrepreneurship is a very valid way for transitioning military spouses to find a way into the workforce, earn a profit, feel valued, and start to assimilate into this new culture, right? Integrate and assimilate into your new culture. So thank you again, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you on Monday.